Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior corporate leader, a well-respected thought leader, a good friend, and a fellow member of the YPO from Gurgaon, India, Mr. Sanjay Jain. Sanjay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you for inviting me for the
Thank you.
presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you. Sanjay is the former chairman and managing director of Accenture. He's an author of a paper titled Are We Outsourcing Our Minds? Sanjay is very passionate about AI, and we'll be talking about that. And as I mentioned, he's a fellow member of the YPO. So, Sanjay, my first question. You have spent more than 4 decades working across strategy, consulting, technology, and outsourcing. What are some of the defining moments that shaped your professional journey?
Sure, Ashutosh. So, just going down memory lane for a moment, really after my IIT and going to US and getting an MBA, I started up with the Accenture office in Cincinnati in 1986. 3 years later, in 1989, home called me back. So I came back to India, to New Delhi. And my mentor, Sid Khanna, uh, gave me the opportunity. I was just a lowly consultant to start up the New Delhi office. So I think that was one key pivot in my
Hmm.
career. Then I rose through the ranks, became the country managing director. That was the second pivot. And interestingly, after becoming the CMD, I started up what was known as the strategy and consulting areas of the Global Capability Network. And the key value proposition, Ashutosh, about the value of the capability network was really, I would say, talent agility in terms of having the right talent at the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
So we opened centers in Poland, in Brazil, in Spain, and a variety of other places.
Hmm.
And I'm glad to say that today, if I look at the numbers, we have Accenture overall that's 800,000 strong.
Wow.
And out of that number, half of them, that's 400,000, are in the capability center. So
Amazing.
that's a large. We're one of
Amazing.
the largest centers in the world.
Hmm.
If I look at the really the key takeaways, I would say for others in terms of such a long journey,
Hmm.
I would say there are a couple of them. Number one, I think a key part is the key mentor defines the arc of one's career.
Hmm.
I was just a lowly consultant, and I got the vote of confidence from Sid in terms of really starting up the Delhi office. So
Hmm.
that was one. Number two, I think it is, yes, definitely hard work, but also being in the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
The timing creates the opening, but then you got to walk through and find the opportunity.
Hmm.
Third, I think a key thing is really in terms of that the leadership really is begins long before you really get the title. So yes, you get the visiting card, but you gotta really take on the responsibility before authority is granted, and
Hmm.
that is key. Fourth, and I think this is a key part, which I would say would be a key takeaway, is that careers really become more meaningful when you go beyond personal success. And what I'm talking about now is institution building. And I think that part about setting up the Delhi office for Accenture, number two, creating this capability network was
Hmm.
really what I would say is really in terms of the institution building.
Hmm.
Uh, fifth is really in the key, I would say, is in terms of keep reinventing yourself. I
Hmm.
mean, don't just rely on your past strengths, keep looking at the new strengths. So, in
Fascinating.
summary, I would say it is great mentors who open the door. You need to have the courage to walk through the doors and then the discipline to create institutions well beyond your personal success.
What a great response. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sanjay, you've recently written a paper, Are We Outsourcing Our Minds? And when I read that paper, it got me thinking because you've written some very interesting points that seem to be staring us in the face, and yet they are so real. So I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about your paper, Are We Outsourcing Our Minds Today?
Sure, sure, sure.
My first question, Sanjay, the title itself is very provocative. What does outsourcing our minds mean in practical terms? And a follow-up question, is technology making us smarter overall or simply changing the way we think?
That's a key question. You're right, Ashutosh. That's a very provocative start or title to the paper. I think it was really, as one looked at it, as thought about it, it is that technology has always uh, helped us or taken away part of our cognitive, I would say, work in terms of doing spell check, doing trying to search for something, trying to navigate, look at GPS, etc., etc. And in terms of what we get back is time and attention. So that seems like a great deal that we've given this up and we're getting time and attention. But what we're finding now is, and neuroscientists are saying that that's not quite so, because what's happening is you losing part of your mental faculty. The key part that's getting impacted is really the cortex,
Mm.
which is a hub in terms of where learning, memory, etc., happens.
Yeah.
And it is the age-old adage that if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm.
So by not by this help that AI is giving us, but if we are not using it the right way, we're really atrophying our cortex, and that's not good for us. And an added interesting part, as one researched and found more about it, is that there's a deep psychological element to it. What's happening is that we are becoming over reliant on the tools.
Mm.
And there's almost, I would say, a sense of what I would call learned helplessness
Mm.
that's taken place and a self doubt. Can I function without these tools? Can't I function? Etc. And that's really not good for us.
Mm.
The one added part I wrote in my paper was what I would call the Flynn effect.
Mhm.
The Flynn effect was really all through 1900s, from 1930 to 1990. Our IQ went up by 3 points every decade.
Wow.
In 2010, there was a reverse Flynn effect that started. And what started happening was issues of verbal comprehension, reasoning, decision making all started plummeting. And the
Mm.
key people impacted were folks who were 18 to 22 years old.
Mm.
The correlation was this was also the advent of the smartphone era. Smartphone in your pocket, always on, outsourcing your mind.
Mm.
So, really saying, folks, there's something that was happening there which caused the reverse Flynn to kick in. The summary point really being that if you use these technology as a partner, you're doing great.
Mm.
But if you use it as a substitute, then you're hollowing yourself out.
Mm. Amazing. Well said. You also argue that calculators may weaken arithmetic skills. How significant is this impact in everyday life?
That's an interesting question, Ashutosh. And uh, the way the summary answer is that yes, I think it does weaken your mental skills. The ability to take a group of numbers and hold them in your working memory and being able to operate on them is key to our existence. The key part of the brain that gets impacted, just to slightly wordy, but it's called the DLPFC, which is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Mm.
And the DLPFC does not just look at learning and memory. It is looks at decision making, reasoning, problem solving. So really it is the executive hub of the brain. And that part is really gets weakened if you don't use it properly.
Mm.
I mean, if you think about it, this I would say almost asymmetry.
Mm.
You give the uh, type something into the calculator, you get the answer back in 2 seconds.
Correct.
So you get back 2 seconds of your time. But 2 seconds over 65 years is your frontal lobe has not had its morning walk.
Mm.
And I believe in it so strongly that two two quick examples.
Mm.
One, all through my years at Accenture, the entire 40 plus years, is I was known that you hand Sanjay the spreadsheet, detailed spreadsheet, and he will tell you within a few seconds if
Mm.
there's an error on it.
Yeah.
And that is really what I would call the sniff test in terms of being able to figure it out. And the second interesting example is I believed in it so much that I've started tutoring my granddaughter, who's just 5 years old, on addition and subtraction. While the school hasn't even started doing it,
Mm.
she can now do two-digit adds and subtracts very easily.
Amazing.
And if you look at the brain is at that age is adding 1 million synapses a second. Let me rephrase again,
Mm.
say that again. 1 million synapses a second.
Wow.
At 5 years, she has 1,000 trillion synapses in her brain.
Amazing.
Post that, yes, pruning happens as you get to the adult. But the point being that if at that age it's such a malleable brain, and if she's able to learn some of these skills, it's a gift for a lifetime.
Mm.
And Kawashima, the key neuroscientist, has said that yes, folks, even at 70, if they are able to do math drills, they are able to stave off dementia. So
Mm.
that's a
Well
key
said.
part.
Amazing. Amazing. I also, same vintage as you. When I get a long list of expenses, I always run through it and mentally I know whether the total is correct. But,
Absolutely, absolutely.
you
That,
know,
that faculty of just doing the sniff test, you don't need to, you know something is right or
absolutely,
wrong.
doctor. Absolutely. Well said. Moving on, Sanjay, your paper also highlights the neurological benefits of handwriting. Why does writing by hand engage the brain differently from typing?
That's again a very interesting question,
Hmm.
Ashutosh. I think in the world where everything is accelerating, this is the one tool that being slow works in our favor.
Hmm.
The headline is exactly you said that handwriting is slower than typing, completely understand.
Yeah.
But what's happening in those milliseconds, the brain is summarizing the information that one has heard
Hmm.
and encoding it into memory.
Hmm.
It's interesting. There was a very interesting experiment that had been done by a Norwegian neuroscientist, Audrey van der Meer. What she did was she took a group of students, divided them into two parts, and took a cap with 256 sensors and placed them on their head.
Hmm.
And then had told one group of students that you would uh, uh, type out the words that are being flashed, the others that you write by hand. What is interesting is that the folks who were writing by hand, all the brain centers of writing, of memory learning lit up. Folks who were typing it, those brain centers were silent. So same set of folks, but two completely different neuroscientist neurological events. Same thing was repeated with at Princeton, where again took a group of two students and asked one set of students to really type by on the computer, and the other to write by hand a very detailed essay. The folks who obviously typed out took longer notes. The ones that wrote by hand took shorter notes, but the ones that took shorter notes were able to recall much better. The
Hmm.
folks who typed out did not recall what they'd written.
Hmm.
Princeton went on to say, okay, the folks who had written, who had typed out, saying, okay, now you use your brain and write the essay again.
Hmm.
Like I said, they could not recall
Yeah.
what they'd written.
Yeah.
Versus, and this is the key thing, that folks who had uh, handwritten and said, okay, now use AI, they were able to do a much better. So really saying that you need to think first and then really
Hmm.
use
Hmm. Hmm.
AI.
Very interesting.
Again, again, quick points in terms of just uh, practicing what I preach
Hmm.
is all through my years at Accenture. whenever there was a key client presentation, the night before, I would take handwrite all my keynotes, and I was able to deliver them clearly the next
Mm,
morning. Second interesting example, a few months ago, I started learning Urdu, and I after a few weeks, I realized that my memory had started improving.
mm,
And as I started researching, what I found out was amazing in terms of saying, if some of you know Urdu, or just to explain two quick points, you write from right to left versus a normal, and each of the letters changes shape depending on whether it's the beginning of the word, or the middle of the word, or the end of the word.
mm,
So the ability to write from right to left, as well as to be able to memorize what is the logic of the changing shapes,
mm,
activates actually the right hemisphere of our brain. Normally we work on the left. This activates the right hemisphere. And studies have shown that that right hemisphere activation delays dementia by 5 years.
wow,
At my age, Ashutosh, I would take that in a heartbeat.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. My next question, Sanjay, you cite research showing that the mere presence of a smartphone can reduce cognitive capacity. Why does this happen?
That was again a very interesting finding, Ashutosh. The headline is that really you do not need to be using the phone for the phone to be using you. Adrian Ward at the University of Texas carried out an experiment where he uh, took a bunch of students and grouped them into three categories. Category one was folks who had the phone silent and
Mm,
on their table next to
mm,
them. Category two was the folks who had the phone in the bags. And category three were the folks who had the phone in the other room. They were then tested in terms of what I would say the working memory and fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence is really, I mean, not something that has known before, but is new intelligence that you are gathering. The folks who had the phone next to them scored the worst of. What was happening was really that if you think about it, the phone has become really a mode in terms of entertainment,
mm,
education, etc., etc.
mm,
And the brain has a finite amount of what I would call attention resources. So by the phone being on your desk face down even, you're
mm,
suppressing the urge to be able to even look or hear for the ping. And by suppressing that urge, that suppression is actually taking part away from your working memory.
mm.
So if you are doing a spreadsheet, etc., for milliseconds, you're continuing to wait for the ping to happen,
Yeah.
etc. So it's the only modern tool that actually charges you even though you're not using it.
Mm, mm. Well
So
said.
that's the summary.
Sanjay, the section in your paper on generative AI is very timely. Do you believe AI poses a greater cognitive risk than earlier technologies?
Point, Ashutosh, because clearly, as you can see or hear about, Gen AI has become the be all and end all. You talk to anyone, and Gen AI and
Yeah.
these AI tools are the top of the conversation. But every other tool earlier would really impact part of your sub skill, so to
Mm,
say. Gen AI is one of the key ones that actually is impacting part of your thinking,
mm,
your ability to form or create form an argument, reason, compose, etc. All of those are really getting
mm,
impacted.
mm,
Again, there's an interesting study done by Natalia Kosmanea at the MIT Media Lab. What she did was she again took a group of students and divide them into three categories. Asked one set of students to write out an essay using ChatGPT, another set in terms of using just a search engine, and the third in terms of writing by brain. The folks that wrote by ChatGPT, the teachers called their essay
Mm.
soulless.
Mm.
That what they'd written was just, without, can't even say what it
Mm. Mm.
the value of it was. The the folks who wrote by just using the brain uh,
Mm.
wrote the best. And then interestingly, the folks who had written by ChatGPT, they would say, okay, now you write it just using your brain. They couldn't, because they could not remember what they'd written with ChatGPT because
Mm.
the memory parts had not been encoded earlier.
Right. Right.
Versus the folks who had written handwritten and just used their brain, then they were asked, okay, now you use your AI to further revise what you'd written, and they scored the best. So it was back to that point that think first and then use AI in
Mm.
terms of
Very
assistant.
interesting. Very interesting. I have time for two more questions, Sanjay.
Sure.
You describe curiosity as the meta faculty that drives all other learning. How can parents, educators, and leaders nurture curiosity in an age where answers are available instantly?
That's a very important and very pertinent, and I would say relevant point for both the children to know about, for the educators to know about, and for the leaders to know about.
Mm.
The summary, even in my paper, one wrote about that what we started doing is we started looking at bringing AI literacy to the schools.
Mm.
And as one started doing that, a key part one talked to the educators as well as to the students about is about the issue around cognitive offloading. What I mean by that is, as we teach students how to use ChatGPT, you ask ChatGPT a question and it tells you the answer instantaneously. Where is the learning? There's no learning that has happened. You asked
Mm.
something and you got back an answer.
Mm.
So really you're offloading your cognition to the tool. So
Mm.
what we told them is what you need to do is you need to reverse it. You need to, as you ask ChatGPT a question, you need to know or have a possible answer in your mind earlier.
Mm.
And then ask ChatGPT, can you please test my understanding? Can you test my reasoning? So to go back to the Socratic method of learning, where it's asking the questions rather than getting the answers
Mm.
immediately.
Mm.
Back to the
Mm.
preamble, which I
Yeah,
said, that convenience is not really equal to learning.
correct.
Interesting, again, research done by Susan Engel, who's done a lot of work with children. And children, again, at the age of 5, ask about 100 questions an hour.
Mm.
Why is the dog wagging its tail? Why is the sky blue? Why is grandmother's hair white? At the age of another, I would say, sixth grade or seventh grade, it comes down to 2 questions an hour.
Mm.
Another year or two, it comes down to 1 question every 2 hours, and then it tapers off.
Yeah.
And that is, if I just take related to our brain and to LLMs, the large language
Yeah.
models, just talk about how important curiosity is. The brain, as I talked about earlier, has about 1,000 trillion parameters. ChatGPT has about 2 trillion parameters. ChatGPT, the parameters have been trained by engineers and optimized. The brain is the original foundation model.
Yeah.
It has been pre-trained by evolution and fine-tuned by experience.
Very well
And
said.
the key dial is really curiosity.
Mm.
That is critical. So summary points being for the parent, that if a child asks you a question, first try and understand why are they asking, what are they asking, what else have they observed, and try and question them. For the educator, it is reward the questions, not the answers.
Mm.
And for the leader, is create an info gap on this. What I mean by that is if you're walking into a meeting that you don't know much about, read up a bit
Yeah.
about it, but read up only part of it and walk in with questions.
Mm.
So walk in with questions, with and we'll get a much better answers.
Very
And
interesting.
the key other point is that really you need to learn something new, and then within 24 hours try and train someone else. So in summary, I would say is the most dangerous thing that can happen to your brain is to not get surprised. That's
Amazing. And my last question for you, Sanjay. As you look ahead 10 years, what gives you confidence that humanity can benefit from AI and technology without surrendering the cognitive capabilities that make us uniquely human?
There are, Ashutosh, three reasons which gives me the comfort and the confidence, and one principle.
Hmm.
I think the three reasons are really number one, that the brain is reversible. If we look at Kawashima and his points about the maths drills and saying that yes, people 70 years old, if they start doing it, they can now actually be positive for their cognitive
Hmm.
abilities. Number two, the MIT Media Lab point, where the brain plus AI was able to do best. So the way I would put it is that the faculties that have atrophied have not gone away. You just start using them more, and they'll come back. So that's point number one. Point two is we have the diagnostics. If you asked me this question a decade ago, we didn't have that. We now have the EEGs, we have the hundreds of studies around what really is happening with some of these faculties and how to preserve them. So
Hmm.
that's three. And the third is that these mitigations I'm talking about are nothing major. That they are little. You put the phone in the other room.
Hmm.
You try and recall first. This it is, I would say, the cognitive equivalent of just brushing your teeth. So there's nothing major
Right.
that's there. And the principle I would talk about is a little counterintuitive. What I mean by that is deliberately build the friction back into your life.
Hmm.
So the summary I would say is that so long as we use AI as a substitute, it will hollow us out. But if we use it as a partner, then we will survive. I
Hmm.
mean, at the end of the day, Ashutosh, frankly, it's our own brain, and the brain that we save will be our own, really.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And on that note, I just want to say, Sanjay, this has been such a fascinating conversation with you. I'm sure my viewers and listeners would love to reach out to you. Maybe if you can share your email ID so that if they want a copy of your paper, that would help.
Sure, Ashutosh. So my email is san59jan, that is SAN 59 JAIN at gmail.com. So
That is
be
San,
happy to,
yeah, that is
be ha-
San59 Jan, Jan at gmail.com. And do reach out
sorry, I
to,
said SAN 59 JAIN at gmail.com. Sure.
okay. So, on that note, Sanjay, thank you again for speaking to me and for really enlightening us from some of your deep, well researched thoughts from your paper, Are We Outsourcing Our Minds? Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.